Hey there, and welcome back. The section we're about to build now is my absolute favorite in this entire project. And that's because in this section, you're going to learn how to build an amazing rotating card effect. And to do so, you'll learn how to use the perspective and backface visibility properties in CSS. Plus, you're going to use background blend modes, and you'll also learn how and when to use the box decoration break property. So, there are like 200 lines of Sass code in this section alone, so let's get to work. And here is what we're going to build in this section. So we have the three cards here, and as soon as we hover them, they rotate like this. So I showed you this before, but now that we're going to build it, let's take a look at it again. So we hover, then we rotate, and when we hover this button here, of course, we have this effect. And yeah, and also in this section we have, of course, this H2 here going on, and then at the end, this button. So let's start by formatting this section here with this gray background color here that you see. And then, of course, putting the secondary heading here. And we can also start implementing the row here, because you see that these are three equally sized cards. And so we're using the columns from our grid again that we coded before. So let's start by implementing these things, okay? So back to our code. Let's start with the index.html file, okay? This one is going to be called section tours. Once again, a section element, and then with the name of section tours. So class section tours. All right. Then what we need now is the secondary heading, and I'm not going to write the code again. I'm just going here and copy it because it's actually the exact same thing. And so let's put it here. Once again, it has this weird formatting going on. All right, and so the title here should be most popular tours. Okay, and then we can also put a row with 3 columns in there as well. So let's just copy them from here. And here we go. All right. And now we can then style this section tours here, okay? And we're going to do that once again here in our home file. Let's get rid of that actually. And so this one is going to look a bit like the section about. So let's actually copy the background and the padding, and we're going to adjust this padding probably a little bit later on. But for now, let's leave it at 25 pixels like this. And so let's now take a first look. And so yeah, so here we go. Now once again we have this problem here with the white space, so we should probably move up this entire thing here, and then let's give it some more space here down there just for now, so we can see clearly what's going on here when we're coding our cards, so we have it nicely in the middle of the page and not here in the bottom. Okay, so 25 then at the top, 0 on the right side, and now let's say in the bottom we want like 50 RAM at least. And then on the left side, 0 as well. And then we should also move up this entire section a bit, such as we did with the section features. So let's take a look if 10 RAM is actually enough. And yeah, seems so. Let's just inspect. And yeah, so here we go. So the section now goes until this point, and that's totally okay. All right, so let's now start to implement our card component. Because again, I'm going to define a card as a component so that we can theoretically later reuse it on the page. So let's start with the very basic functionality, all right? So a new file, card.scss, and then don't forget to implement it here. And card. Give it a save. And of course you also need it in the HTML, right? And so here in this column. So once again, we're not touching the column in any way. We're creating a separate div just for the card. Let's just put some text here. So again, this is just for testing purposes for now, just to implement the basic functionality. All right. So let's start by giving it some background color. Okay. Background color, orange, red. So for testing, I really like this color, and some height as well. Let's say 50 rem. And just for testing, that should be enough. Now, what actually happens when we hover the card element? Well, all it does actually is to basically rotate 180 degrees. So half of a circle, right? So a circle is 360 degrees, and so 180 degrees is half a circle. So half a rotation. Because if you take a look here, that is what happens, right? It only rotates half of a circle, basically. You see? So it's not 360 degrees, it's 180 degrees. And it rotates across the y-axis, right? So remember, this here is the y direction from top to bottom, and this is the x direction. And so the axis of this rotation is the y direction, so the y-axis. And so we have a rotate y. Okay, so let's implement that. So we'll transform once again, and then rotate. And you see that we have this different rotates here. So according to the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. And as I explained, I want the y-axis, and I want 180 degrees. Okay. Now we of course need to give it some animation. So transition, and I will put all here because we're probably gonna have more later on. And then 0.5 seconds, let's say. Or we can actually make more, like 8.8 seconds, so that it takes a bit longer. We have more time to see what's happening. Okay. So let's take a look. And it's actually already kind of working. You saw that? So it rotates, and we can then see the text here from the other side, basically. So from the back, you see this text here, it's inverted. Now it says like starting from here, card text. You cannot really see it really well, maybe, but that's actually what's happening. Now the effect that we have on the original looks a bit nicer, right? So let me show it. Because what happens is that it appears that it actually moves towards you, right? So it's like it's coming out of the page and towards you, towards the user. You see that? And that is called perspective. So take a look at this one and now compare it with this one. Okay, it looks completely different, right? And that is called perspective. And so in CSS, we can actually define that perspective, okay? So let's do that. And the way we have to do it is to actually define the perspective on the parent element of the one where the transform, where the rotation occurs. So the perspective has to be on the parent. And what that means is that we should define the perspective property in here on the card, and then have a child element for this rotation here, okay? So let's now first add the perspective property here. Perspective. And now in here we have to put a really huge number of pixels. So let's go with 1500, so 1500 pixels. So like this. So I will put 150 rem. And I will show you some differences in a second. But for now, let's continue. Okay, and actually, to make this work in Mozilla Firefox as well, we have to use the Moz prefix. Okay, so let me add that one as well. All right, and so now it will work in Firefox as well. So this is once again quite of a new property here, and so it's not already implemented in all of the browsers. Okay. Now remember how we had to now put these properties here on a child element of the card. Okay, so let's actually do that. So we want a new div here, and I'm calling it the card side because it's one side of the card. And later we will then add another side. Okay. So just text here. So again, this is the block, and then this is the element in the BEM notation, right? So card side. Here it is. Okay, let's actually close this one. We're done with it. And so card side. All right. Now this here also has to change, of course. And so the way we're going to do that is to say that when we hover the card, then we want the side to transform. Okay, does that make sense? Let me write that out to you again so it makes more sense. So we hover the card, right? And when the card is hovered, then the card side will be transformed. And we do not put the hover here directly on the card side, because later we will have more sides. And actually it makes more sense that we really want to hover. We want this effect to occur when we hover the main component, so the main block. So when we hover the card, that's when our effect starts taking place. Okay, so let's now take a look. Let's actually make the text a bit bigger here, just now for testing purposes again. Color white. I'm just going to write it like this because I will delete it in a second. And font size 2 rem. Alright, and so now let's hover it. And yeah, so that looks much nicer, right? You see, now it also looks as if it was moving towards you already, okay? So that's much better than it was before. Now I wanted to show you how it looks like with different values of perspective. So let's come here to the parent element and change that. For example, imagine we only had put 15 rem. Then it would be this crazy effect. Whoa, what's going on here? So it's not really clear how these values here affect our perspective, but basically the lower the value, the more dramatic the perspective is, okay? So let's put a really high number here right now. And so now it looks almost as we had it in the beginning, so we don't see any perspective effect at all. And so this is kind of a bit of experimentation until you get it right, until you get the look that you want for it, okay? So we now have implemented this side of the card, but actually we have two sides, right? So again, you can see that we see the back part of this card now here because the text is now the other way around. So basically we're seeing the card now from behind, but that's not really what we want, right? So what we have here is that basically we see one card side in the beginning, and then when we hover it, we see the other card side. So let's now implement that in our HTML and CSS. So we have another card side. So let's put here front and back. And so now we need a way to distinguish them. And so what I'm going to do is to add a modifier. So card side front and then card side back. All right. So now we have a front side and a back side. Very simple. So front side and a back side. So let's actually give each one a different color here. And this one is going to be just green, let's say. Now think about what does it mean that this side here is the back side. So what's the difference between this back side and the front size? Can you imagine that? Well, the difference is that the back side in the beginning is already rotated, right? So it's already 180 degrees on the back. And then as soon as we hover the card, then it moves to 0, okay? Does that make sense? So let me implement that and show it to you. Okay. So before we hover the card, this back side is already flipped basically, right? So it's already at 180 degrees. And so now we have to change this hover thing here as well, because only the front side is what rotates 180 degrees, because the back side is already at 180 degrees. So this only applies to the front side. And what does apply to the back side? Well, if it's already at 180, it now needs to go back to 0. And that's actually it. Alright? So let's test it out and then take a look at the code again if we understand it. So this is what it looks like right now. Well, not exactly as we imagined it, right? But we're getting there. Okay, so you see that this one is now flipped and this one is at the front. And when we leave it, this one is on the front and the other one is on the back. And you can see that because the text starts from the right side on the back part. Now, in order to finally create this effect that we have in our final version, they need to be on top of one another, okay? And so how can we do that? Well, we simply use absolute positioning. And we do that on both of them. And so we can do it right here in the card side class, because that's the one that's common to both of them. So position absolute. And we simply want them to start at the top, so top 0, and at the left, so left 0 as well. Now remember, we always have to give the parent a relative position, okay? So position relative. And now we should be almost there. Okay. Now since we gave them an absolute position, what the elements do is that they basically start fitting to their width. So you see this one is now wide, the red one is wider than the green one because it says front, and the front text is wider than just back text. Okay. And so we need to change that as well. So let's give them a width of 100%. And the final piece of the puzzle is another property that I actually showed you before, but that was just to fix a weird animation error. But this time we really need this property. And the one I'm talking about is called backface visibility. Alright, remember me talking about this one? Well, what this does is that if we set it to hidden, it basically hides the back part of an element. So you saw that when we rotated the card where it said front, it then, as soon as we rotated it, that text started from the right side. And so we were seeing the card from the back side. And so now when we specify this backface visibility to hidden, we will no longer be able to see that back part. And that's actually exactly what we want, right? So let me check that again. And so here we go. Well, actually the perspective is kind of gone. Let me check out what's going on here. And okay, I see what's going on here. You see that? So this card, it has no height anymore right now. So the cards, they have a height of 500 pixels as we defined, but the card does no longer have a height. And why is that? Well, it is because its height collapsed. And that's very similar to what happens when all the elements are floated. But right now, all the elements are on position absolute. And so they're also taken out of the natural flow. Remember when we talked about that? So we took these cards out of their natural flow, and therefore the parent collapsed and lost its height. Now when this happens with floats, we have a clear fix, but with position absolute, there is actually no such thing. There is nothing we can do, at least not with pure CSS. And so what we have to do is to actually specify the same height that we gave to the card itself, okay? And so now we're saying that the height of the card should be 50, and of the sides as well. And so they can have the same height, and with that our perspective should be back. And here you go. So that's exactly the way that the other animation looks like, right? Well, not exactly, it's because we can also use another animation type because, well, so we have the transition here. Remember there's something called the transition timing function, and when we don't specify it, then it simply uses the most simple one, which is a linear animation, but we don't want that, we want ease. And so this animation looks a bit smoother. And again, I'm going to explain better to you what these transition timing functions really mean, how they really work, okay? And I will show you a lot of examples as well. For now, let's just use this. And so with that, our animation should look a bit better. Now we can also get rid now of this weird background colors here as well. Here we can actually put the background color and it should be white. Okay, so color white. And then here on the back, let's take a look at our example. Okay, so now this looks a bit better, in fact. And so let's take a look here at this one. And so you see that in here we have this nice gradient going on from this corner to this one. And these are actually some new colors that we have to add to our color palette. So this yellow and this orange here, and then also these two colors here, so this blue and this like dark blue or pink. So we have these new colors here. And this is just the normal green gradient here in the middle. But the other ones we have to add. So let's put them into our variables file. And let's put them right here. So I'm calling the first one the color secondary. And then light. So it's a light version first. And the color here is FFB900. So I'm missing the hash here. All right. So I got all of these colors here by getting some inspiration from other websites and other web apps. And if you also want to get some inspiration, see some examples, then I have a lot of websites where you can do that, and you can find them on my resources page. Okay, so I have a couple of links. There are multiple sites out there where you can find inspiration. And that's something that's really important as a web developer and also web designer. So I consider myself that I'm both. And so I like to be on top of that. So the latest design trends, so that I can keep up with the industry and then use these trends as well in my own designs, okay? So this is now the tertiary. Okay, so put these colors here in your variables file so that we can now use them here in the card. So we have 3 cards and 3 gradients going on. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we actually need a new modifier here, right? Because we have 3 card side backs. So it's getting a bit more complicated and we have more and more code, but well, that's just how it works. This is a really complex component. Okay, so now we can specify the back in general, and then we will have some very specific code for each of the 3 different cards. Okay, so let's do that. So back, and then the number 1, and then of course we will have some for the next 2 cards. So no background color in here, and here we have a linear gradient. So background color, then linear gradient. So it goes to the right bottom corner, so right bottom, and then the colors that we want. So color secondary light and color secondary dark. All right, so let's check that out. Well, that didn't really work. Sorry, let me check out why that happened. Actually, it's not background color, it is background image. So for a linear gradient, it's image, not color, of course. Well, let me reload it again. And let me now take a look. Inspect. Well, it still has this green color here. So maybe there was again an error with the compilation. And yeah, okay. So what it says here is that I have an undefined variable, color secondary dark. Okay, light and dark. Well, let me check out the light and dark. Okay. Of course, I need to change this. So we have the light and the dark one for both. Okay, probably you had already noticed this error. I just did not. Okay, so sorry about that. And so yeah, that looks amazing, right? Now, just as the finishing touches of this card, let's give it these rounded corners here that we see, and also this very subtle shadow that you see underneath the card. Okay. So border radius of 3 pixels, let's say, and then a nice box shadow. So 0 in the X direction, 1.5 rem in here, then 40 pixels blur, so 4 rem, and then for the color RGBA, as always, color black, this time with a 15%. All right, now you see that we also repeating these kind of shadows here all the time, so we could also do a variable for all of these shadows. But again, I'm not going to go crazy here now and define a variable for everything. But in fact, you can do it, and probably you should do it just to test it out for yourself. And so I think that would be a good idea for you. So find all of the shadows that are the same or at least similar, and then make a couple of variables like shadow 1, shadow 2, and shadow 3. And then you can simply add these here in the in the box shadow property. All right. Yeah, that looks better, right? And so that is the basic functionality of the card. Now in the next lecture, we're actually going to start styling it. And so we're going to take care of that image you see up there, then this nice orange text box that you have there, which is slightly overlapping the white part. And so yeah, looking forward to do that in the next lecture.